welcome to this week's edition of the Middle East and Africa Sustainability Dialogues, a podcast series by Microsoft that is looking at the journey to net zero, the pathway to net zero, in which all countries and companies need to participate, and individuals, all of us collectively, in which to provide some part of the solution to surfacing the ideas that will make that roadmap more tangible. Today, we're looking at the swing of the pendulum from energy transition to energy security. How is the focus evolving and what is the pathway forward? That is ultimately, I think, if there's a question of 2022, it's the energy transition coexisting with energy security. Of course, it's in the headlines. It's literally front page news every day. Let's start off by inviting our guests to make some opening statements on this question. And we'll kick off with Joseph Alfred, founder and CEO of Ally Power. Joseph, your thoughts on the theme of today's podcast.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this very important topic. And it is very present in all of our minds about the energy transition. And it's no longer a question of sustainability. It is also a question of, can we actually generate the energy for our transportation as well as our energy needs on site in a country where that energy is actually going to be used, so that we can actually have that energy security, that we aren't reliant on a foreign power that may or may not be in a certain conflict at that time. So whether that means electric battery, whether that means hydrogen, there are ways that we are developing, different corporations are, in order for us to transition and ease that transition from our hydrocarbon past to our zero emission future.
Let's welcome Suha Saad Al Saif, Sustainability Director for the GCC at the National Energy Services Reunited. Suha, clearly energy security coexisting with energy transition is a real challenge and agenda for the energy sector to put forward at this time. Your opening thoughts, please.
100%, Sean. So if we go to the basic, we'll see that energy security is based on four main elements: being affordable, being available, accessible, and acceptable. And it's the right of everyone who lives on this earth. We have all to work towards that direction, and then at the same time move to more carbon emission free energy, like net zero, less carbon. So the approach must be looking at as a whole. So we build, so energy security must be built based on accelerated energy transition. And this is basically our approach in Saudi Arabia.
Jeffrey Beyer, Managing Director of Zest Associates. We do have the unique moment in time when COP27 and COP28 are both taking place in the region. And sort of as a curtain raiser to that, there's been a lot of statements out of the region and towards the idea that we have to have a sensible energy transition, that the energy transition to date has derailed and created the current energy security crisis. Your thoughts on those two elements clashing, if you like, at this moment in time?
You know, Sean, I think thank you for having me. And I think that this question is really we're really talking about two sides of the same coin here. I think energy transition and energy security really do go hand in hand. The destination that we're all aiming towards is a low carbon energy future that involves decentralized energy systems and a lot more domestic production. But it also involves diversification of sources. And I think that this recent energy challenge that the world has been facing just demonstrates the need for that diversity of sources. Not every country can produce all of their energy. There will be some importers, some exporters. That's going to continue into the future. It's about diversification. And I think the thing we really need to distinguish here is between short-term shocks and medium-term trajectory, right? We're responding to these short-term shocks that have been created by this immediate crisis, sometimes by bringing on old coal or less or more polluting forms of energy. But this is a near-term response to respond to a crisis. I think we need to look at the medium and long-term trajectory, where these shocks have also embedded long-term changes, a ramp up of renewables, an exponentially increasing hydrogen market to manage this long-term transition. So I think the two things really go hand in hand.
Again, the swing of the pendulum from energy transition to energy security. How is the focus evolving and what is the pathway forward? Our fourth guest, Dr. Metwali ElNabi, founder and chairman of the board of EnviroTaca LLC in Egypt, where COP27 will be held in the next few weeks, and where innovation is so critical to the solutions that we all seek. Dr. Metwali, what impact is this clash this year of energy transition with energy security could have on innovation and the investment required in new solutions?
Sean, thank you very much for having me. And as you mentioned, the energy transitions, it's simply we are transferring slowly from hydrocarbon dependent slowly to renewables. It could be 20%, 30%, 40, 100%. The idea is good, but how is this possible to achieve? Actually, I have a report here in my hand. It's by International Energy Agency for September 2021. The report actually is amazing. It's showing the world total energy supply by source from 1973 up to 2019. You can see that charcoal representing 26.8% of the energy sources that we are consuming, oil representing 30%, natural gas 23%. All three together are 81%. So, and you cannot imagine that nuclear only 5%, biofuels and biogases are 9%. Others means including geothermal, solar, wind, tide, wave, oceans, all 2%. And hydro 2.5%. This means we are very far away from achieving what we are looking for. And I really agree with you that the innovation and technology and the governance, the good governance actually supporting companies that have a plan to work in renewables by some kind of incentives, tax-free investment, funding, whatever, but this is really required. And if you look to 1973 up to today, no changes in the demand. Why? Because in 1973, the world population was only 4 billion. Now we are almost at 8 billion. So yeah, the charcoal since 1973, it was 24%. Now it's 26% supply, not because we are reducing the charcoal, but because the population is higher and the consumption for the energy is required more. So yeah, it's a little bit complicated actually. The energy transition might be smooth, but the energy security is a little bit complicated and it will require a lot of geopolitical and politics decisions, and this is very complicated actually.
It is certainly complicated, but inevitably we have to find our way through that. Joseph, the year of two halves, if you like, COP26, we all came out of the Glasgow gathering last year with a massive wind in the sails of the energy transition and the new fuel mix that was to come with it, and hydrogen being at the center of that amongst others. And then, of course, the second half of the last 12 months, we saw the big move back to energy security, if you like, given the conflict in Europe, but ultimately the shortage that may have come anyway because of the lack of investment that was going into old energy because of the move to new energy. I'm wondering from your perspective, as we look at the year that's gone, how has it impacted mobility? We saw Tesla's results come out yesterday. They were a little bit disappointing. Where is the impact of this year in which the two halves of energy security and energy transition clash regarding mobility and automotives?
That's an extremely great question. In terms of mobility, the hydrocarbons are going to, for the foreseeable future, play a significant role, especially in the heavy industries. So we're talking trains, we're talking planes, we're talking boats. But while we are still living the lives that we have in terms of transportation and getting to where we need to go, we also need to be very keyed on that transition to hydrogen for those types of heavy industry sources. We can do both at the same time. We can do the transition and we can.
But we see this year that doesn't seem to, I mean, that doesn't seem to be in the moment the reality, does it? I mean, you've got coal still 70% in China. We've got the Germany turning back to coal. I mean, it looks like either or at the moment.
I think that in terms of the investment strategy, there is a coming to a moment of the reality of the present moment and being able to live and work and go to the places that we want to go. But that doesn't mean that things aren't happening in the background in terms of investments that are going to transition to cleaner sources, either zero emission or carbon negative, in the long term. So those conversations are happening, and I'm happy to be a part of those conversations. And it is going to radically change the nature of the energy game, especially in terms of energy security. But because what we're talking about is generating that hydrogen on site and being able to then transport it to where that end destination is going to be for the end user very quickly and very cheaply.
Suha, the energy industry of the region, the oil and gas industry of the region, Saudi Arabia being obviously the biggest actor, has both an opportunity and a responsibility to find its way to transition. And Saudi Arabia, of course, has a massive project towards Vision 2030. What do you think the expectations are for the oil and gas countries of the Gulf going into COP27?
Okay, so thank you, Sean. That's a very good question. So in Saudi Arabia and the whole GCC countries, we have a very high awareness of all the environmental issue, and we are very committed and going towards that direction. I'm coming from a service company, small company, relatively small, comparing to the major player, Aramco, or the biggest service upstream service company. And ourselves, we have created a segment called ESG impact segment, where we address environmental issue through a technology, so imagine us as myself on this road in a small scale. Imagine the larger scale, the biggest, the Ministry of Energy, the other SABIC, Aramco. So we are going towards that direction. We are committed to energy transition. We're not exiting from oil. Oil is a major source of energy, and we are talking here. I'm here talking to you because of the oil. So we're not exiting, and we will not be exiting from oil. However, we will be rational in terms of our emissions, in terms of our effective of the in terms of the environment, and how can we more considerable of environmental, of the footprint, of the carbon footprint of the sector on the environment.
Jeffrey, the financial industry, of course, has a big role to play to ensure that uh, energy security and energy transition can coexist in perhaps a more balanced way. If the good news or silver lining, hopefully, of this year is a more balanced coexistence between these two. You were a founder of the UK's first clean tech venture capital fund, now capitalized at £100 million, whatever a pound's worth these days, but hopefully still worth a few quid. But where is capital going this year as the City of London, Wall Street, where all the big financial centers look and observe the this sort of collision of energy security and energy transition? Is capital still there for those two pieces to coexist?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, I think we're seeing a real seismic shift in the financing space around sustainable investments and low carbon. I mean, the green bond market's almost 500 billion now. An emerging market called sustainability-linked loans, sustainability-linked bonds. These are, the first one was issued in 2018, 2017. It's now bigger than the green bond market itself. This is capital available to companies that set meaningful targets around ESG or sustainability. Lots of risks with this type of capital, right? Are penalties strong if companies that raise discounted capital fail to meet their targets? What does a meaningful target really mean? But this is a very interesting space, and I think is mobilizing hundreds of billions in the right direction. I think what's interesting, speaking about COP and finance in particular, is the need for a couple of key financial pieces to really move forward. Right now, developing countries have been promised 100 billion a year in finance. I think last year,
which was part of Paris, right? That was 2015. It's still not really arrived.
And it still hasn't arrived, exactly. And I think, you know, you can only be patient for so long in a conference which relies on total consensus. So I think in Egypt, we're going to see a real move towards ensuring that 100 billion is genuinely mobilized. And we're going to see Egypt as the, you know, this is dubbed the Africa COP or the implementation COP, right? We're going to see, I think, Egypt's constituents in Africa really push for this finance to materialize. And in the past, you know, 100 billion seemed like this outrageous sum, or at least a very 100 billion used to seem like a really large amount of money. But I think in a post-COVID world, in an energy security world, we've seen trillions be mobilized from these developed countries. And saying 100 billion is really too much to manage the inevitable impacts of climate change is no longer really holding water.
On that point, what you're talking about there, which is the rich countries' commitment to provide funding for the developing countries, 100 billion a year as part of the Paris Agreement. But what about the private sector being incentivized? In this current window, we're seeing in the last number of months, as the shift went from energy transition to energy security over the last 12 months, we also, in that second half of that year, of the last 12 months, we've had a big backlash against ESG investing. We can't open the Financial Times any day of the week and it's not sort of having a bash at ESG. Your thoughts on that? Is that significant? Is it a temporary blip and an inevitable pathway forward?
You know, I think ESG has a place, whether it's the sole metric that you want to use to mobilize finance in certain directions. For me, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, the Economist a few weeks ago had a major expose on separating out some of the letters, right? When you're looking at sustainability, does it make sense to compare boardroom diversity and good governance with a climate change emissions reduction target? Are those two things really comparing apples to apples, or are we looking at things that don't really make sense in the same score sheet? So I think that, you know, ESG does need another look, especially from the financial perspective. But I also
looks like it's getting one.
It's certainly getting one.
Let's go to Dr. Metwali, who is sitting in Egypt. And of course, as COP27 arrives on your doorstep, I mean, literally, I'm sure the numbers of delegates already arriving. Dr. Metwali, what does this mean for Egypt and the Africa COP? Do you think it can achieve that very ambitious, if you like, headline of the implementation COP?
Yeah, of course, it will achieve. Egypt really prepared very well in this regards. But actually, I'm going to talk on my behalf.
Yes.
At EnviroTaka, you know, as per your last question regarding to the technology and innovations, EnviroTaka investing and working very close with our partners in Switzerland, Renergon International, to design, build, and operate waste-to-energy plants that feed by organic waste, agriculture waste. And as you know, Egypt is an agriculture country, and we have a huge amounts of waste that have a very good potential of the biogas productions. And as per the feasibility studies that we have, that this biogas can be upgraded and can be injected into the national grid, or even compressed into cylinders that can be used by the civilians. And this is really a huge project, and we have a great support from the Egyptian government. They create just 1 year ago a feed-in tariff regarding the biogas pricing, and to help us and to help the investors who would like to invest in the biogas and waste-to-energy projects. Egypt is working very hard in renewables. We have the BIM ban for solar energy projects, and we have a lot of really projects related to energy renewables. And I know we can achieve it. Yes, we will do it.
Well, you certainly have a very large population of 100 million people hosting the first Africa COP. But at this moment in time, Egypt has made climate financing a very big part of its sort of agenda of implementation. And to the point that Jeffrey made there, that the investors are kind of re-looking at this ESG framework around climate projects. Your thoughts on the struggle. I mean, you've a great idea. You're in a African country looking for financing. How difficult is it? Has it become for new entrepreneurs, new ideas in the like a place like Egypt to attract investors?
You know, as a new entrepreneur, I received a lot of support actually from the private investors and from the governmental banks. They are supporting us too much. What it comes to the government, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. Yeah.
What it comes to government, I will keep it to the government to answer it
Yes.
regarding to GM finance. So from us, from our point of view, from our side, the full support we receive, and we are working very close now to have 1 megawatt plant from waste to energy biogas. And as you said, Egypt now is exceeding 100 million population, and you cannot imagine how much municipality solid waste is producing on daily basis to the landfills. And this innovations, technologies that we are leading now, it's not only getting rid of the waste, but trying to create a source of energy.
Joseph, the idea of coexisting energy transition and energy security, I want to get your insights on how you think the economies in this region can incorporate it into their, if you like, their macro planning. Where do you see the sort of opportunity, the value opportunity to incorporate those two things?
Well, I'm glad that Dr. Metwali is starting to talk about the waste to energy component, because I think that we need to showcase all the potential sources of energy that are on the table. And as we look for this energy transition, we can find the ways to generate that energy and make it as clean as possible and cheap as possible, so that the number of consumers that can actually utilize all these sources become much more widely available.
That ultimately is the problem, isn't it? I mean, the accessing of that, the bringing the scaling of the new solution, that's piece of the financing puzzle. Where can we go, if you like, in the Middle East to achieve that? Because in some ways we have a great opportunity to be pioneering here. We've got the sun, we've got all sorts of different, we got a huge amount of carbon industry. There's ways to be pioneering, but the scaling up part seems to be still a challenge.
I would say so, but a challenge is just something that hasn't been accomplished yet. And we we have the opportunity of not just our lifetimes, but of a generation, that we can actually make this transition and increase our energy security simultaneously. And we do need to be looking at an all of the above approach in how we think about waste, how we think about where we're actually going to be getting that energy that can be transferred into the cleanest sources possible. So in terms of my own company, we would like to partner with waste to energy companies, because in our own feedstock, in our own feed stream, that goes right in line to how we actually get the energy to the cleanest possible amount and into the driver's seat of the most amount of vehicles. So rethinking that entire process of how we go about our daily lives and then access that energy is certainly something that should definitely be a part of the conversation.
Well, certainly in the sort of descriptive headline of what that is now being referred to as the circular economy, the circular opportunity. Suha, of course, in the oil and gas industry, we have carbon capture. What is your outlook for that? I mean, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, CCUS, as the acronym is known, has been a aspiration for some time for the industry, and yet we haven't really been able to cross it into the full scale up opportunity. Where do you think that can go now, with, let's say, COP coming into the region as some kind of extra wind in the sails, but CCUS as a real new solution of opportunity?
Absolutely. So this whole concept is one of my favorite concepts, cradle to cradle. So how to look at the whole ecosystem of your energy, from waste to energy. We believe in it. A circular carbon economy is a huge division that has been created by Minister himself within the Ministry of Energy, led by one of my dear friend, actually. We are looking at the carbon capture, sequestration, and storage. The Ministry of Energy and Saudi Aramco, they have a huge project and investment as well on this regard. However, the whole project it's in early stage. We're there. The budget is there. The plan is there. We're moving towards that direction. Promising, but we're still there is some stuff is going on, like implementation and stuff, but still we're working towards that direction. Nothing major happened yet.
Jeffrey, just to take a lead from those comments from Suha, you're obviously in the region, UAE-based sustainability consultancy, transitioning some of these opportunities from sort of pioneering to scale up. Where do you think the challenges and the what's missing that we can get there, particularly with the likes of CCUS? You would think we should be global leaders.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the unique advantages actually that exists in the UAE and the Middle East more broadly is this really complementary pairing between, first of all, quite ambitious government policy matched with very strong state-owned enterprises adjacent to some of the biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world. And we see this ecosystem of players being able to really enact government policy in a serious way. We're seeing this happening in the UAE, for example, in hydrogen. We're looking at Masdar and ADNOC really taking the lead and being given the full authority to develop blue and green hydrogen respectively. But it's not just production that the government's interested in, it's also about use. And that's why we see Emirates Global Aluminum, for example, and other state-owned enterprises which are able to use this hydrogen kind of complete that circle. All of this funded by some of the world's biggest sovereign wealth funds. So I think we've got this really complementary ecosystem in the Middle East that doesn't necessarily exist elsewhere, where companies can enact government policy and that can be invested in from these big sovereign wealth funds. I think that's one.
I mean, there's certainly a moment of opportunity, you would think, Jeffrey, in the sense that we've had all of those pieces before. Yeah. Right? What's different now that translates that ecosystem into, let's say, implementation COP? Hydrogen is getting backing now. Hydrogen's been around for 100 years.
Yeah, we're starting to see, I think, a few different things. There's like the global conversation has definitely matured. So there's a real move politically, internationally towards this. I think the public is very involved, much more than they were before. I think really importantly, the commercial opportunity here is starting to make itself known. And we're seeing this for renewables, right? I mean, solar, we all know, 90% cheaper than it was 10 years ago. Wind, 55% less expensive. Batteries on the same trajectory. Hydrogen, I'm sure, will follow the same trajectory. We're seeing this race to the top in terms of deployment and scale, and it's really going to be a first mover advantage story here, as it was for previous technologies like solar and wind, where we see those real touch points in China, Denmark, the US. I think in the region, in the Middle East, if we want to really grab that low carbon future innovation dividend, it's about moving forward soon and also looking at regional cooperation and collaboration so that each country doesn't necessarily compete against each other for that thin slice of the pie, but rather, carves out a big slice regionally and takes that leadership role internationally.
And you can see we all can see, and as we started out our conversation, energy security versus energy transition, but that there is over the horizon a new energy opportunity. And why wouldn't you want to be a leader in grabbing that? Saudi Arabia on hydrogen, why can't they be a global leader if in post 2050 their fossil fuels may not have the market that so that's the new piece, I think, the economic urgency perhaps. Dr. Metwali, I wanted to get your thoughts on that challenge, because ultimately you're at the cutting edge of scaling up. What challenges are you facing to scale up your unique and wonderful idea, and what needs to happen for that to reach the next sort of commercial scale?
Yeah, actually, the challenges with finding a feed-in tariff and defining the price of the product, which is the biogas, and finding the proper investors. But now everything is fine, everything is in place. We had a support from the Prime Minister for giving the feed-in tariff for the energy from the biogas, and it is now in force, in power, and we are using it in our visibility. And once we get our visibility done, we are targeting 1 megawatt plant. Actually, we are not going to produce a biogas. We are using the biogas to have electricity through CHP combined heat power units to provide the power for a small village. And this will be our first pilot plant. And we're working very close, as I told you, with expat in this field from Switzerland. And hopefully by first.
It's clearly one of the challenges ultimately, isn't it? The idea that one can put a tariff at a price, the price of a carbon, the price of off-taking hydrogen. We've got to get to a point where there is a commercial price attached, an agreed price attached. And perhaps COP27 could help that move along. And that's where I'd like to wrap up now, is to get everybody's thoughts about what a successful COP27 could look like, the outcome, without necessarily being too ambitious, but ultimately, what does success look like, Joe, to you?
Yeah, actually, as I told you, Egypt government really, Egypt government, they're really removing all the obstacles that we are facing as technology owners. Because our technology in biogas production, it's a patent technology in different universities, and we receive a lot of support to do this. Actually, I have one challenge, global challenge, which is water, energy, food nexus. It's not only energy, because the three are all connected together. In 1800 year, the Earth hit 1 billion population all over, recorded in the history. Then after 130 years, we get the second population, the second 2 billion. Then 30 years later, in 1960, we become 3 billion. And now we are 8 billion. 8 billion populations. This will require a lot of food, energy, water support, not only energy. Energy is required for water treatment, and water is required for energy. It's again,
they are all so integrated. And one of the reassuring things, although tragic, is the amount of food waste there is in the world today. Would tell you there's no shortage of food, it's logistics. But let's get the view, Joe. Let's wrap us up, everybody, with a short sense of what a successful COP27 would look like to you.
I think a successful COP27 would be the number of announcements and just the breadth of the industries that are going to decarbonize, from steel, from water treatment, from water generation, from desalination, from waste to energy, from hydrogen production, for transportation. I am looking forward to seeing the number of companies and the number of announcements that are going to be coming through. I had the great pleasure of actually being in Cairo in May for a pre-event for COP27, and just the amount and the quality of the conversations that was occurring between the ministers within Egypt, as well as the companies that can provide those technological solutions, was really awe-inspiring. And I think that we are all looking forward to an excellent COP27 with lots and lots of great promise.
Suha, your thoughts, a successful COP27, what does it look like for you?
A successful COP will be coming up with the policy, reasonable policy that can be embedded, can be reached, and communication dialogue between energy companies and government and countries, and so more of a dialogue and openness, so to share thoughts.
Well, certainly having both at the same table in itself is hopefully some sense of success.
Yeah. I
Jeffrey,
know the
please.
energy or the oil and gas companies are not invited to such an events, but we would like to have more present of oil and gas companies.
Well, they'll certainly have presence more than before. Jeffrey, you're at the last word here today. A successful COP27, what does it look like?
For me, I want to see some stronger emission reduction targets from all countries. I want to see progress on the issue of loss and damage, which is essentially money reparations in some ways for developing countries that are suffering the worst effects climate change. That's a thorny issue. And the third thing I really want to happen from COP28 is just a successful consensus at the end. This isn't a milestone COP. This is an intermediate COP on the way to the global stocktake in the UAE next year. We need to keep the show on the road, and that's what we really need out of COP27. It can't collapse. It needs to succeed in some kind of consensus statement at the end.
Well, staying on the road to COP28 in itself would possibly be a success. Thank you so much. Our half hour together has come to an end. It moves quickly. We've had a great, interesting discussion around the swing of the pendulum from energy transition to energy security. How is the focus evolving and what is the pathway forward? Some thoughts, some answers to that. There's obviously many more and we will pursue them. But I'd like to thank our guests for being on this week's edition of the Middle East and Africa Sustainability Dialogues. Joseph Alfred, Suha Al-Saif, Jeffrey Beyer, and Dr. Metwali ElNabi. Thank you so much. Please join us again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.